welcome, I'm Kira the Scrivener, and today I'm going to be doing a top 10 list of 2019. Normally people do all of their favorite books in one list, but I want to be extra and I read 216 books this year, so trying to put all of those books into one list seems like I'm kind of going to be leaving a lot of those books out, so instead I decided that I'm going to be doing it by genre and in one case by age range, because I put all of my books that are YA and fantasy in the rest of the list and left one list for middle grade simply because I didn't think that it was necessarily fair to put a book that is targeted against children against some of the nuances and things that are in adult books. I love middle grade, but there are definitely different things that I love about it. So I'm going to be jumping right into it. This isn't necessarily completely in order. I do absolutely love each and every one of these books, but they do progressively get more my favorite as they go on. But even then, I was like thinking back and forth as I was writing down the things I loved about this. So the first one I'm going to have on here is King of Fools by Amanda Foody. This is the second book in the Shadow Game series, which is very underrated. It starts with Ace of Shades, which I loved, but then I reread it and I loved it even more. It takes place in this kind of like Las Vegas kind of feeling. It's the New Annas, and it has the City of Sin, it's called, and it has casinos and street lords, and then we have Anne Salta, who is this kind of like naive dancer who comes in, and she has this guidebook, and she's all real cute and all, and she's trying to look for her mother, and she comes to her one lead, which is Levi, and he is a street lord who has gotten into some trouble, and it's just a really magical series. I really love the magic system because everyone has powers. They all have different gifts that they have from each of their parents, and that is really explored, and it just feels like a really fleshed out book. I read it twice, the first one and the second one, which is on this list because it was the book that I read in 2019. I really just loved, but I really need to read them physically because there's so many different cute little acute aspects of it that I just didn't get because of the fact that it was in audiobook. This is The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the second book in the Folk of the Air. I read all three this year, and I have to apologize because I had to kind of reserve my own judgment because fae books, I was like, I'm not gonna like those because sometimes misogyny is so ingrained even in females, but this is a series that I really, really loved. I love the fact that it has a lot of world building and really fantastic family dynamics because pretty much the origin of the story is Jude is our main character, and her mother was a human living in the Fae land, and she was a lover of this Fae guy who was a general and kind of scary, and she had a kid with him, and then she ran back with a human guy, and they had twin daughters, and then 8 years later, he finally hunts them down and brutally, brutally murders them before his three daughters, or one's his daughter and two are his, whatever, her half-sisters, and then they take them back into their world and they're raised by him. So the only father that they really have had for the last 10 years is the man who murdered them. But he's also like loving and caring to them, and it's very interesting, and I really enjoy that. And the other main character, Cardin, also has some very interesting family dynamics that are explored really well as well, and I just really enjoyed it. The second book is by far my favorite. The Wicked King really deals with a lot of political intrigue and political navigating, and I love it. I love the world building. It feels so real and authentic and like fleshed out in such a way, and highly recommend it. Do not put it away because you think that it's going to be like just angsty romance, which has it in, but it has so many other beautiful aspects. And then we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book I've heard about for so long. It is an adult magical realism set in the kind of in-between late 19th century and early 20th century, and it takes place mostly focused on this one circus. It's not very plot-driven, and it's not very character-driven, which is surprising, but it has third-person omniscient shifting point of view with like different timelines, like it's the same timeline but we're coming in at different points, and I absolutely love the idea that someone is telling the story to us about it, and I love it. I love the magic around it. I love the way that the world building happens, and the way that we're just written so beautifully and gorgeous. And even though the characters aren't necessarily completely fleshed out, they are all really vibrant and unique, and I just really love it, and I fell in love with it in a way that I didn't even really expect. Hello City is the second book in Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and I watched the movie before I read the first one, and I wasn't really expecting to love it, but Jessie, the reader, just goes on and on about it, so I was like, you know what, I'll give it a ride, because it's been sitting on my shelf since I bought it at a used bookstore like 2 years ago, and wow, I was surprised. And the second book even wowed me more. I love the fact that it takes place with these people with mysterious powers, and they're kind of landlocked in 1940, and then now we have a boy who has come in from the modern world, and it's very intriguing, especially since the second book is not a sedentary book. You explore the peculiar world so well, and I love the characters we met, the different ways that the world has developed, and the different pockets of time that we go into. And that was really magical. I also love the conversation about age, because even though they're children, many of them are like 80 and 90 because they're aware that the human world is still going on, but they're stuck in for their own protection. And it's dark fantasy, but it's also really well developed. I've read all 4 that are out now. The Kingdom of Copper is the second book in David Badd's trilogy by S.A. Chakrabarty, and I really, really loved it. The first book is The City of Brass, which many of you might have heard of, and it is an adult fantasy novel that is just really full of Middle Eastern mythology. It originally takes place in Cairo before transferring into this kind of secret djinn world inside our world, so it's not a full high fantasy because it's just kind of like the secret part that they've hidden from humans, and I really, really love it. The first book, I was kind of on the fence of because I really loved the concept, I loved many of the characters, but they didn't do a lot of good world building. We would have something introduced but not fully fleshed out, but I really enjoyed this. This takes place 5 years later, and I really appreciate the fact that we're given the time to let the characters develop and grow and the world grow, and we're really mostly in one place, so we really get to see David Bad, the city, so beautifully like fleshed out and lovely, and the characters grow and everything grows, and I just really, really love it. The Gilad Wolves by Roshni Chokshi. This is a lovely book, and it takes place in 1899 in Paris, and it is a heist book. And I haven't read Six of Crows, so I can't really talk about the comparisons or whatever like that, but I really, really adore this book. I have a ridiculously long, detailed review of it if you are interested in it, but I'm not going to be able to go into all of it. But pretty much I just really love the characters. The magic system is confusing. It is based around the Tower of Babel, and that is not completely coherent, and that is my major complaint about it. But the book itself has beautiful writing and beautiful character development. We have LGBT characters, we have autism rep, and we have a lot of conversation about the complexities of race and ethnicity, because many of our characters are biracial or have different places where they are of privilege and different places where they are not, which is very interesting. I also really love the fact that we have really strong female relationships and that we have an ensemble cast, because we join them when they're already friends. They are already a pre-existing group that have been doing heists for some time, and now we're joining them on their big thing. We only have 1 new character that's really being introduced to the fold, and still they're not the main character at all. I really enjoy that we get to see from many points of view, except for Tristan, and you know, he's just like, I like tarantulas, and he doesn't have the most gray morality like the rest of them, so that's okay with me, but he likes tarantulas, so that's questionable. But pretty much, other than that, I love it. It hasn't gotten the greatest reviews, but I just don't understand it. There's so much of it that I just treasure. The way that she writes, the way that she infuses history, the way that she talks about after how she, as a person who is of Indian and Filipino descent, really wanted to tell the story about how even though she can be a lover of this time of history, that comes with complexities of how people that are like her have struggles in this era, because it's also the time when the Great World Fair was happening and people were being in cages. And there's so much thought put into the way that she talks about these issues, and it's in the setting of a fantasy aspect, which I love as well, so highly recommend giving it a chance. In an Absent Dream by Sheena Maguire. She is the author of the Wayward Children series, and this is a group of adult novellas that take place with characters who have traversed worlds. And we go back and forth between seeing them in a school that is helping them kind of trying to deal with the aftermath of that, whether that's wanting them to forget or wanting them to hold on. And this book, it takes place with one of the characters we meet in the first book, and it's looking at her story in the 1960s of when she was a child who was traversing into this world of the goblet market, and I adore it. I love the ideas that everything comes at a price, and the way that they deal with everything is very intriguing. I love the short book concept that we follow so many aspects of her years and relationships so well in such a short amount of time with a lot of passage to time, but I appreciate it and love it so much. Each time I read her books, and I read through the beginning ones again, that she has just grown so much as an author. She grows so much in dealing with the world one piece at a time, and the way that all of these worlds intersect and the way that these characters have come to be the ones that we love is just excellent, and she does it so well, so tightly, and amazing. A Torch Against the Night is the second book in Sabaa Tahir's series, An Ember in the Ashes, and I really, really love it. I read all 3 of this book, and I was really, really surprised by how much I loved it. It's kind of based on Roman mythology, but it has a lot of infusing of Middle Eastern mythology as well, and it takes place with these 2 characters in the first book and 3 in the later books, which I really love because I can't talk about her because it's spoilers, but man, this is the reason why I love A Torch Against the Night so much as this one character. But the first character we are introduced is Leia. I'm not going to pronounce her name today, apparently, but she is the daughter of some rebels, and she goes undercover into the house of people who killed her parents, and she grows a lot in characters. I love that we're given characters, especially female characters, who are allowed to be really, really strong, but it's not physical. We have this misconception that characters, in order to prove that they are strong, have to kind of take on traditional masculine things, which is just sexism kind of hidden. And I love that she's able to be strong and powerful in herself, even when she's scared and even when she's afraid and even when she's not physically able. And that is something that I really love it. I don't love that this book jumped into the action, but I was surprised by how much character development. Like, each book has such a different, like, not tone, but like they're in such different places and they've grown so much that you're surprised that they're even the characters that we started with, that it's hard for me to talk about the second book because so much of it is spoilers. But the second character that we're introduced to is Elias, and he was the one who really first stole my heart. And he's a character that's mother is the commander of this army, and they wear masks, and they have masks that like congeal to their faces as if they can never return it. And he's about to graduate, and he's been kind of like playing it off at night because he doesn't want to lose his identity. And there's a lot about identity, about the fact that when we allow masks to come over our faces, is shown by like psychology and stuff, that people will be more brutal. They'll be more, because they believe that their actions, they don't take as much onus for it. And I thought that that was such an interesting way, that they don't have identity, they don't have personhood. Their job is to serve the government. And that is such an interesting one. But pretty much there's a battle he has to enter to be the next emperor, and he isn't given a choice on whether he wants this, and he has to be able to kill his friends and kill many aspects. And that is the part that I love almost most about the series, is that Sabaa Tahir doesn't take Eddie hostage. This is one of the most brutal YA series I've ever read. There is so much death. Many of the characters do not make it. If you can't deal with character death, then maybe not take it, but I love character death. I love the brutality. Specifically in the first book, there is one scene that will always stay with me as one of the most brutal scenes I've ever seen, and there's no prisoners. There's just so much blood and so much emotions in that, and we care about it because we care so much deeply about the characters. The world building's really good. The villains are like ridiculously fleshed out. Apparently I can't talk today, and I know I've said it, but I love it so much. I love how much care Sabaa Tahir has given into the series, how much she's given into the writing and world development, and I'm just going on now. So we're gonna get into my top 2 now. I debated where I was going to put on this list because this is Half-Blood Prince, and this is by J.K. Rowling, of course. And I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it, and I read Harry Potter from The Prisoner of Azkaban until the end this year for the first time. Yes, for the first time, don't judge me. And I loved this one. I didn't watch the movies until I was 18, and Half-Blood Prince has always been my favorite, so I was not surprised that it was my favorite again. The last and the greatest of my protectors has died, and I am more alone than I have ever been. And the idea of grief always sticks with me very hard. I love the hardest time, and this is when I feel like Harry is really given the aspects of being almost grown. He gets a lot of development, we get a lot of world. This series is magical. I binged every single one of them, and I also just, like, I was hungry. Like, these books have such great world building that I, like, was hungry. I kept on stopping them. I made, like, pumpkin juice several times. I, like, am lactose intolerant, and I made butterbeer. It was great. I, like, wrote because of it. It's just such a magical experience. I understand why it's an instant classic. I understand why Rowling really changed the way that fantasy was and made such a generation fall in love with writing, and I can tell that so much through. Number 1, we have Blue Lily, Lily Blue, and this is by Maggie Stiefvater, and this is the 3rd book in the Raven Cycles. I read 2 to 4 this year, and I read them again, all 4 of them, in anticipation of Call Down the Hawk. And I just really, really loved this series. I love that her writing is kind of like lyrical and beautiful, and she also has such in-depth, like, humor in it. Like, there's no one that's really comic relief or anything, but I was reading this at the same time as I was reading A Wheel of Time, and even though I was enjoying a lot of the aspects of The Wheel of Time, the characters, the world building and stuff, I found that I couldn't enjoy it as much because it lacked a lot of like humor, and the writing wasn't something that clicked with me. And I think that that has a huge aspect on the way that I enjoy series, because even though this is an urban fantasy, a genre that I don't go to a lot, I really enjoyed how much I loved just being in the world, being in the characters, how much they felt fleshed out and beautiful. I love the line, and Gansey ran with dead Welsh kings. It's just this idea that there's these raven boys who go to this preparatory school and they're just searching for dead kings. And then we have Blue, who is a daughter of a bunch of psychics, like not a bunch of psychics, but they're kind of all her moms, so it works well. And she's not a psychic, but she can enhance other people's powers, and she befriends them, and they all become really great friends, and they all have such unique personalities, unique dynamics. It's also a line that they're all just really, really in love with each other, like more than less. They're just, it's this weird thing that just shows friendship. Like that's how I kind of feel about friendship, and I think that it really grasps the way that people deal with friendship very authentically. And I love that they're all just like little nerds and they're not ashamed of that, and just so much fantasticness. I loved every second of reading it, unless we have Kravinsky, because he's annoying. He's the villain in the second book, and man, did not like him. But everything else was just completely lyrical and beautiful and humorous, and I loved that it wasn't very plot-centric. If you're a plot reader, maybe not, because even many of our predictions and things are subverted because it's not about that. It's about the lessons learned along the way. It's about the characters, not about the plot. The idea that they're searching for Welsh kings is more the backdrop of why they're friends and why they're exploring, not really the reason behind who they are, which I love. Anyways, these are some books that just made me absolutely lovely and happy and joyful and immense, and really made me happy this year. So happy reading and writing. Let me know which books that made you happy this year, which books that you just enjoyed and devoured. If you disagree with me, if you agree with me, let me know. I look forward to it. Happy reading and writing. Feel free to subscribe, comment, and like, because that's always really nice for me. And I will see you next time.